there's that sense of like, what's on offer for children in school? Like, is it worth getting out of bed for? Because what we're seeing is like a lot of kids are not getting out of bed for school. We're seeing an increase of persistent absenteeism. And sometimes you think, well, come on, get to school. And then sometimes you think, to be honest, I can kind of see why you might not want to come in. Like, what are you getting out of bed for here? So there's the assessment, there's the academic, and then enrichment and personal development. I'm really kind of keen on this. I think we overlook a lot of barriers that stop a lot of children from being able to engage with enrichment in and around schools. But it's such a missed opportunity, like all of the different cultural trips and visits and opportunities we can put in place for children. But often the children who can't access those opportunities are those that maybe have additional needs and probably are also having that co-occurring barrier of being disadvantaged, because the two often overlap significantly. And if you're disadvantaged, what does that mean? It probably means you don't have much money to be able to afford a lot of the hidden costs that get in the way of things like enrichment opportunities. So like if you're saying to a child, come on this residential for 2 days, we're going to pay for your trip. You think, great, but there's hidden barriers there. Like they're thinking, what am I going to wear? Because I've only really got one outfit that I like wearing when I'm around my mates. So I'm a bit kind of nervous around what I'm going to do in terms of clothes. What am I doing for food? How am I getting there and the transport? Like all of those kind of things that often we don't think about. So there's a lot of barriers that exist around enrichment, but enrichment should be a really good opportunity to like provide that extra enhanced fun stuff for kids to be able to engage with the collective good and what schools can offer.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are very much looking forward to a conversation with our guest in the studio today. We're going to be talking all things adaptation for learners in a classroom. And so if you are in a classroom, it will be fantastic. If you are leading people who are in classrooms, it will be fantastic. If you aren't in classrooms and you need to think about what it should be like in classrooms, it'll be fantastic. So there you go. We're looking forward to welcome our guest in a minute. Before we do, Steve, anything interesting that we should talk about apart from the fact that the rain has returned?
It's summer. It's either a bank holiday or summer, and then the rain attends, or it's Leeds Festival. So all of those three things come together. Technically, it is summer. I'm not going to say when, but it is summer. But looking outside, you just wouldn't think it, would you?
No.
So yeah, all is good, my friend. Recovering from surgery. Half is wonderfully orange, but he's all is looking good. And yeah, just I know we're not allowed to say when and where and what in terms of the podcast. Hopefully what, because this is a conversation that's going to happen, but maybe where and when. That we are a few weeks out from the uprising, and
it's already gone, Steve.
Is,
uprising's already finished, mate. Ages ago.
When we're recording it, sure, there's a cat and all that, man. It's already gone.
Where's the cat?
So if you want to book on for 2027, go to Edufuturists /uprising 27, and that'll be there for you. But
no pressure, Steve. No pressure. Let's make sure we've got a page ready to go.
I've called it. That's what it is. But yeah, all good.
And the book is out, my friend. It's so the Pick and Mix book, for those people who don't know, and don't know you don't know, the person we've got in the studio actually is a Crown House author as well. We have published a book, Pick and Mix Education, with Crown House, talking about, for parents, how to take control of your students and your young person's kids' lives in terms of their education rather than let it be done to them. So we are very, very excited about that. Hopefully you've all got your copies and all the things that have gone with that. And if you haven't, then the link will be in the show notes, of course. Well, let's get to it then. We have got a person waiting very patiently, and while we have a little gander in the studio, and we're really pleased to welcome Andrew Young to the podcast. We've not met before. This is the first time, so it's all fresh and new. But Andrew, is very. I don't know, where did Stephen come from? Stephen's in the corner. Andrew,
I'll say that.
You be Stephen today.
Yeah, call me whatever you want, that's fine.
Stephen even got his full Sunday name there, didn't he? It doesn't happen very often. Unless he's on LinkedIn, because it's Stephen on LinkedIn, and I have to tag him, and I feel like a bit weird calling him Stephen when I call him Steve all the time. Anyway, we've got Andrew Young in the studio, and before we get into talking about his new book, which is called Adaptive Teaching, Culture to Classroom, published by Crown House team. We are going to get into this in a moment. Please, Andrew, tell us a little bit about you and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, great, will do. Well, first of all, I sympathise with the LinkedIn thing there. It's a very horrible place to frequent, isn't it? Let's be honest.
My journey. I love it, mate. I love it.
Okay. Yeah, the uber professionalism just comes through all avenues on LinkedIn, doesn't it? It's quite a hard space to engage in, I find sometimes. Yeah, so my journey into education, I have been teaching for how many years? 14 years now I've been teaching. I'm a social sciences teacher by trade, so I'm sat today in a school site where I work up in York, and psychology and sociology are my subjects by trade. Got a really keen interest in all things to do with psychology linked to cognitive science, neuroscience in particular, as well as areas of social influence. When it comes to sociology, I'm really interested in social policy linked to healthcare and to education. Trained and worked in London for a number of years as a teacher of social sciences. Probably too quickly, too soon, I was given responsibility to take on the role of head of year 12 as a deputy head of sixth form. That was actually my second year of teaching. So I look back on that now and I was like, what were they thinking when they put me in that position of great responsibility and pastoral support? Maybe too soon. But I think I did an okay job. But that taught me a lot about kind of pastoral development, pastoral care of pupils. And then I moved up to York, much to the delight or demise of my wife, who's from the south of England. I'm from Bradford originally, so I was really keen to get back up to the north, but my wife maybe less so. I think she's a convert. I think we've managed to win her over to the north since then. But we came up to the north and I got a job where I'm currently based here at Archbishop Holgate School in York, which is a great and solid performing school. And I was given the role as head of department for social sciences. And then over the years, after sort of moving the department on in a great direction, I was really, really blessed to be able to be given the opportunity to move into initial teacher training and education. And then I got more of a sort of a complete role within our teaching school. And in 2021, our teaching school was awarded Teaching School Hub status by the Department for Education. And not too long after that, myself and my colleague Fiona were made co-directors of the Teaching School Hub. So now we have this great role where we wear lots of different hats and it can get quite full on at times. But essentially, we serve our Teaching School Hub region of 153 schools. And that's from early years through to post 16. But every year, on average, we work for about 250 schools in our general locality where we are. And that's linked to all things national professional qualifications, wider professional development, initial teacher training and education, the early career framework, and all of that fun business that entails. So it's a really interesting and varied job. And then at the same time, I still teach. I'm teaching sociology at the moment. And I do quite a bit of work across our trust as well, linked to teaching and learning. So lots of different things going on at different times.
And you say teaching, it must be a dream. York's fancy. I'm from Yorkshire. It's definitely not Bradford. It's definitely not Wythenshawe.
York is fancy. My favourite city.
You're not teaching in Wythenshawe, Andrew, anymore. Do you know, in Bradford, if anybody doesn't know that, and that's where Rita Sue and Bob too was filmed. I know a friend who actually works in the secondary school there. I'm from Leeds, but York is fancy. Like, imagine Harry Potter, everybody. That is what all teaching learning looks like in York. There are no bad kids. The sport, there is no football. It's all Quidditch. And all of those wonderful things.
Can we just come down from that massive misconception there, Steve?
All histories around Jorvik, all of those wonderful things, chocolate and...
that's all it is. There's just Vikings everywhere, chocolate historians through every avenue you walk down.
Do you walk on the walls? Is that like part of like the routine? The PEs on the walls?
Even though it's not funded by the government, that's been removed. So the teachers have now got to get involved and walk the walls. So that it's a really interesting thing actually. As as classroom educators and even leaders within that have always been in one school, even if that forms a bigger multi-academy trust, the wearing of multiple hats and the spinning of plates is actually a quite an interesting thing. And I think, so I know we're going to talk about adaptive teaching, but actually adaptive, how can we make sure that everything is adaptive because the world is ambiguous? As you've said, school is becoming better for actually more diversity in regards to roles and spinning those plates. That really is, I don't want to say real life as if education's a bubble, but actually a lot of people that have gone through the same school don't really see the complexities of juggling all of those kind of things. So tell us a bit about that. What does that look like? And as an organisation and have you seen that adaptive and that application to across York? We just made that joke of everything. York is a very diverse city, and actually so are the schools. So how do you ensure that ultimately, hopefully, it's not a standardised approach and everyone does exactly the same thing, because York is so diverse in terms of its areas and sections and schools. What does that look like? And then how does that apply to teaching and learning and the learner experience as well?
It's really interesting, this. So, to be honest, I was a bit of a skeptic of kind of the nuances of context before I came into my role. And I always kind of had this view. Sometimes I felt context was used as a bit of an excuse of like, well, that will never work here kind of thing. And I was like, what do we mean by that? Working in the region where I work, we actually cover the coastal community of Scarborough. And that's the kind of borough of Scarborough that goes from Staithes down to Filey. So we've got a coastal community that we serve and work with. And then we work with this rural community of the kind of area of what we call Rydale in North Yorkshire. And then we have the urban community of York. So we've got that coastal, rural and urban community. It's actually really interesting from a context point of view, because what you see there is very different challenges playing out. So in York, we have some absolutely fantastic schools, early years settings, primary schools, secondary schools, great alternative provision and fantastic special schools, of which we have 2 in York. And I think what York manages to succeed on is this sense that recruitment here is effective, retention here is effective. York is an attractive city for people to spend life in and have family and put roots down, and it's great transport links and all of that. And then when you move over to the coast, what you see, and we've just seen the sort of Mission Northeast and Mission Coastal work that the DfE have announced, and Scarborough and Whitby have been kind of identified as this kind of hotspot of intensive government support. But what happens there in that coastal community is they have a lot of problems with recruitment and a lot of challenges with recruitment and retention. And that's because often it's like mundane but really important things like transport is just not effective. If you get the Rattler train that goes from York to Scarborough, it takes an hour at best, and it's every hour. And so it's just not really commutable. And so it's really hard to get people to move to the coast. And equally, it can be quite hard to keep people on the coast from a retention point of view. So that instability can actually have an impact on things like teaching and learning, because ultimately it's about the pipeline, it's about the people, and it's about creating those communities of stability and safety and predictability for children and for families. And so that's a real challenge that exists just a few miles up the road compared to what we don't necessarily have here in York. So I've really seen that sort of transfer of the context. So I guess that's one example that I could give there.
Yeah, and I would also hear that it's for many of our listeners who might not even be in the UK context, the awareness of, even in a small area, the change in economic status is crazy. I live in Lancashire, the right side of the Pennines, the ones that won the War of the Roses, but we're obviously not allowed to mention that. I only mention it every time somebody says that they're from Yorkshire, because Steve then gets pissed off as well, so it's fine. But the principle is that we've got some really leafy, lovely places. Then you've got some relatively rural places, some little bit of urban, not much in Lancashire, to be honest, but the coastal, and then you see some of the challenge in the coastal towns. So I totally hear that. And then obviously from an education perspective, we've got then the challenge not just of getting the right teachers in the room because of commuters and the attraction of moving to a certain space like that, but also you've got the challenge of, well, this is what we've always done. This is where we've always worked. This is where my dad worked in that factory, so I work in that factory, and my dad worked on the pier. we'll work on and interestingly, there's that bit that sits in there. And I want to just come back to as well that you're obviously a sociology teacher. I did a little bit of sociology teaching for my sins. I'm a religious studies teacher by background. But as many people know on the podcast, I got given some sociology as part of just because it sounds similar, right? Yeah, a gift.
Yeah, humanities, social sciences, they get lumped together, don't they?
Yeah. And because I've come from an RE perspective, obviously we did. I did that religious beliefs A-level units, and I also did the elements around education as you would make sense. Interestingly, I'm intrigued around this concept around socialization, and so I'm going to go on a first tangent before we start talking about the book, and I want to just kind of dig into that from you as a sociologist as well, in that we, as we've mentioned, have just written Pick and Mix Education, and one of the big challenges that we've talked about here is that school, if you ask people why kids have got to go to school, we talk about socialization, and we know that that's the secondary socialization. Family is your primary socialization generally, but secondary socialization in school, having that ability to form social groups, know what norms and values are, behaviors, and all the other bits that sit with that, developing cultural capital and all the things that are really important. And so when we talk about unschooling, homeschooling, hybrid schooling, online schooling, the biggest pushback by far is about, well, what about socialization? They might not use that phrase, but generally they're talking about that. And I wonder where you sit on it, really, because we suggest that socialization can happen in a mixed hybrid environment, and even in an unschooled and homeschooled environment. It just needs to be intentional. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as a sociologist.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because what we are seeing is a real increase of children across the country that are moving to elective home education, and children moving to hybrid models of alternative provisions that are online, or kind of like a hybrid model of some time in school, some time doing some alternative provision that could be through a different pathway that might be online. Ultimately, my mission when it comes to education is I want as many children as possible in the classroom with their mates and their teacher, thriving and loving learning and spending life alongside their peers. And I think that is the best place for most children to be, right? Where they are able to socialize, to interact, to connect. Because as human beings, like, that is what we are wired to be. We're wired to be people who spend time with people. Like, from the dawn of evolution, inception of time, I think we've been like a group of people called to be with each other. So where we are not doing that, I think the word that people like Margaret Mulholland, I've heard her use this word, great inclusion specialist. She uses this word of the flow. So if a child has been separated from their peers, or from, school or a classroom setting, what is the flow of that interaction, and how long are they spending away from their peers? And when are we ensuring that they're going to loop back in to spend time with their peers or a class teacher? Because if all they ever experience is a life removed and attached, well, then that can be a part of the puzzle that leads to what is known as the separation effect, right? This sense where children get too used to being separated from their peers, spend too much time with adults and not enough time with children, are disconnected from the kind of curriculum in that sense. And that can be quite a disadvantageous position for children, especially children with SEND, who a lot of the time what we're trying to do is give them the gift of life skills and preparation for adulthood. So, like, I'm not saying you can't do that. You can't have the kind of alternative provision and home education, because for some children that is absolutely necessary, right? If that is right for them, then that's necessary. However, there needs to be a flow. There needs to be a connect back into spending time with peers. So if you're home educated, fine, but where in the week are you spending time to be with peers, to be with other children, to be playing and interacting with other children? So there just has to be that sense of flow. So to go back to like the question of socialization, I think like it is possible. The primary socialization that typically happens in the family can then feed into the secondary socialization that typically happens through like education or different things that children would interact with. So you can have both in those settings, but the flow needs to make sure that is keeping that possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think because like online learning and hybrid learning and everything else, I think it's not always done in isolation. There are some wonderful opportunities to connect and collaborate online. And I think for homeschooling and people that are going through a different personalised path, that ultimately they will still connect. They'll still have after school clubs. And actually there are clusters of wonderful practice for home education and homeschooling, where those families are coming together and doing great stuff. They're going out to places and everything else. But I totally take your point. I even though I achieved based on an outcome of GCSEs at secondary school, probably wasn't my kind of place, but Ben thrived. Don't know your circumstances, but everybody's different. And I think it's just that concept of that one size fits all model is a very difficult one. Fantastic for maybe even the majority, but not for all. And I think that's the great thing of, and also, how do we ensure that rather than standardising it, making sure that schools are still making sure physical activity is a priority within even the school setting, making sure socialisation and collaboration and coming together is, because sitting in rows all facing the front and not communicating. Some schools do that and don't even get to chat. And I think that's the thing of actually it's a mechanism of quality of learning experience and what does that look like, and not just the giving of information. Where do they get to apply it to context and explore and evaluate and analyse and all those things, which I think is what you're shouting about there. In terms of the classroom setting then, rather than actually do education as a whole, what does that inclusive classroom climate actually look like as a space? If we just focus down on if they are in the building and they're in the classroom, what does that adaptive look like? And I know, again, we've said it's not the same, but what are some examples of some good practice that you see there?
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. And just to kind of loop back to what you were just saying there as well, Steve, I think that's a question we should be asking, isn't it? The system. If we've got so many children and families who are opting out from the kind of mainstream classroom environment, why is that? What is it we could be doing to better adapt to meet the needs of the families and children in our current context of society at the moment, so that we aren't the kind of the area that they want to move away from? How can we become more welcoming, more inclusive? And it links into your question just now, like what can we do to make sure our schools are as inclusive as possible, so that more people feel that they can belong and they can connect into what is on offer in a mainstream setting in the first instance. So yeah, I think we've got some big questions to ask there around that. In terms of inclusive classroom, I think ultimately it's about the climate for learning being right. And when you think of inclusion, that could mean anything. It's one of these, I mean, like adaptive teaching, it's one of these socially constructed concepts that we have, and it can mean different things to different people. So my take on it is a sort of multifaceted response, really. So I'll try and go through a few things. Ultimately, I think a classroom that's truly inclusive is a classroom that enables every child to be able to think, to learn, and to succeed. And I think that sounds easier said than done. Like in my work, I go around a lot of classrooms, and I often see a lot of classrooms with a high level of passivity and disengagement and children not participating. And I went around a classroom recently with a few members of staff that worked in that school, and we came out and they said, "Oh, well, as you can see, the children they're all engaged." And I said, "Well, were they? Were they all engaged?" Because I saw probably about 12 students who looked like they were very much not taking part in this lesson. They didn't look like they were thinking. They didn't look like they were active. They looked like they were passive. And I think that's a real thing we need to consider. So it's got to be a classroom where every child thinks, where every child is learning, every child is able to participate to a maximum capacity. But what can stop that from happening is barriers to learning. And that's the thing of where adaptive teaching comes in. So an inclusive classroom needs to have a high level of challenge. It should be that the teacher is setting an extremely high bar, an ambition, where they're saying to all of their children, it doesn't matter what your present circumstances are. They should not define where you end up in this world. Everybody is on this roadmap to this height of success. That's the first principle, like high challenge should exist in this classroom. But like Mark Finnis, who's another Crown House author, he talks about high challenge needs to be matched by high support. So that's really what an inclusive classroom should put in place. High level of challenge matched with that high level of support. That should be a really essential feature that's put in place. And the other thing that kind of feeds into that then is that you're always going to have a class full of individuals, individual needs, individual barriers, but that individual level of success should be driven by a sense of collectivism. which, like, hear me out on this, because I know I teach sociology. I promise I'm not a raging Marxist communist and promoting collectivism to the kind of extreme sense of the term. I actually think there's somewhere to be met in the middle between individualism and collectivism. And I think sometimes we need both, and sometimes we need more of one rather than the other. But I think a good classroom practices the principles of collectivism, and that collective spirit will drive the individual success. So what I mean by that is that it's a classroom full of people that are not always thinking about me, but they're thinking about we. And they're thinking about that sense of the team, that classroom community where kids can come along. They feel that they belong because this is our classroom. This is our space. We learn here together. We're a part of the crew. We're not passengers. We're not just here for some kind of a ride. We're all active, participating members of this classroom. So what great teachers will do is they'll find ingredients to put in place in the recipe of that kind of classroom practice to make sure that all children are participating. They feel a part of the collective. They feel that they belong. But that belonging isn't just a sense of, am I getting what I need here? Like that sense of like, what are you doing for me? The belonging actually is the connection with the commitment, and the two come hand in hand. So that people aren't asking, am I getting what I need here? But they're kind of saying, what can I do to get involved in this classroom? So that's the kind of the goal, for everybody to participate, for everybody to feel a part of the collective. But then, and I'm happy to unpick this a bit more, but then we need to recognize the barriers that exist that block some children from being able to access that point. And when we identify those barriers, we can then think about how what's stopping that child from getting into that position of participation and learning, and what we can do about it.
There's loads in what we've just talked about, that you just talked about there, that I think we could unpick. A few things just to riff off really on in our most recent trends booklet that launched at the Uprising, or is going to launch at the Uprising, is the theme is "We is greater than me," and we so that really ticked. The fact that you used the word crew. Yeah. And we've just been with Gwynap Harry, a good friend of the podcast, and obviously the team at XP have been building that crew idea for a long time. And actually, it's the focus of why we are building the Edufuturist community in the way that we are doing, in the sense of the wolf pack, and that the strength of the pack is a wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. The fact that we can't be lone wolves, and I imagine that the schools that are doing that really well, in terms of inclusivity and belonging, really, they're building on that principle, aren't they, of togetherness and participation. And then actually, in the crew, we found it was really interesting. We watched a little video, didn't we, Steve, up in Newcastle when they came up there, the video where students were basically saying, you're either in or you're not. Like, you can't be half in, you can't be half. And the students kept themselves accountable and each other accountable, which was scary but beautiful in the same way. The other thing just to kind of resonate on is another mutual friend, I'm guessing, based on what you're talking about, and the fact he's also a Crown House author, is Howell Roberts, who obviously talks, and he's been on a podcast, and another good friend of ours in terms of botheredness, and he talks about getting people involved in their learning. So that's why he does all like the theatre piece around it, because you feel like you're part of it. And actually, if you become bothered about each other, bothered about learning, bothered about everything, and actually as a teacher and a leader, is the irony of it all, and I think we'll kind of come to this in a moment. The irony of it all is that adaptation is, good teachers have done that forever. They've always thought about who was in the room, and not just that, right, I've got to get through some content, and here's a curriculum, here's a national curriculum. I was looking back recently, and formal education in the UK, 1870. That's not that long ago. 150 years, 1870. And then national curriculum, 1988. Literally, the year I started primary school was when the national curriculum started. And I look back and I think, I'm not saying any of those two things are bad or good. Sociologically, there's probably a net positive on mass schooling, mass education. And I don't think that's definite. What I will say, though, is the control of that being centralized and the prescription of teaching and curriculum then has probably made it so that you've got to write a book like this. And you've got to write a book like this because we've got a curriculum that is designed for one size fits all. And so what we've got to do is got to write books that say you need to adapt it, rather than going, hold on a minute, should we not just think about them learners and build a system that is for them, rather than saying, like Steve nailed it when he said, like, my experience of education, I thrived in that space despite education, not because of it. And I will say that hand on heart, is that I love reading. I love Shakespeare. I love culture. I love the book I'm reading at the moment is really deep research and like statistics, economics as well. So I love it. But that's not everybody. Yet we've somehow decided that Shakespeare, Pythagoras, sociology at some point, a bit of running, skipping, jumping, that's what happens to be important. And somebody in ivory tower has decided that. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and let's talk about why you've written the book. Not wrote the book. You haven't wrote the book. You've written the book. We're all authors in this room, so let's use the right language. And the book's called Adaptive Teaching Culture to Classroom. And I'd love to kind of get into, there's a phrase that you used in it that I really liked. There's more than a few, but there's one that I really liked. Right in the introduction, it talks about too many vegetarians dining in steakhouses. I wonder if you could explain what you mean by that as the context to what is in the book.
Well, it's exactly what you're just saying, Ben. I think we've created a system, haven't we? And we expect children to adapt to the system that we've created. So we're all adapting. I mean, adapting to our natural habitat and our environment is, again, an evolutionary thing. It's what Darwin observed, that animals have adapted to their environment. And that's what children are having to do with the curriculum and the demands of the assessment policies that we have in place in our country. So when I'm using that phrase of there's too many veggies dining in steakhouses, what I mean is that we have probably, I mean, this is contentious because I know, it sounds like we would probably agree on this here, but not everybody would. We probably currently have a curriculum and assessment system in place in our country that favours the cognitive elite. And I know Ben Newmark has used that phrase, and I borrow that from him. He's a good thinker in this space. If you think of the fact that from an assessment point of view, currently I'm sitting here in a school setting, our year 11 children are doing the GCSEs at the moment, and you think, well, flipping heck, they've got a 7-week period, and they're doing somewhere between 15 to 25 exams over 7 weeks. Like 15 to 25 exams, and for like one subject, you might have 4 to 6 different papers that you're sitting. Like that is a huge, talk about cognitive load, right? Like talk about long-term memory and all of that capacity that is taken from you. Just not put the content to the side and just think about the general practicality of every day thinking about what exam am I coming in today? Today it's geography. Tomorrow it's maths. Then I'm doing a speaking assessment in French. Like the cognitive gear shift that you are having to do from one area to another. So I think assessment, like that needs, and it is, we've got an assessment and curriculum review that's gone through, and I think there'll be some interesting and welcome changes coming from that. But I think we need a better assessment system that supports the needs of some of our more vulnerable pupils, because we can't just expect them to crack on in this world that we have, by the way, created. We need to be thinking about how we're making sure that the world we are creating and can keep re-engineering is one that allows everybody to play. So I think assessment is important. In terms of the academic side of the curriculum, again, too many veggies in steakhouses, too much kind of focus on your traditional core subjects. My wife by trade, she's a Senko. You can imagine our chat when we're at home. We love the Sen chat. She's a Senko, but she's also a dance teacher, and she's not really taught dance for years. Why? Because it's been taken off the curriculum. She's very limited opportunity to teach dance. But what a fantastic subject that is! Like the children that do that, like the capacity to learn about that art form, the culture, the history. We need more of that. We need more focus on the arts, more focus on design, more schools offering things like engineering, for instance. There's the welcome change from the curriculum review, thinking about broadening out computer science to it focusing on just computing to teach pupils digital literacy and AI and all of that. Like brilliant. More of that is needed. Citizenship, they've said that there's a renewal expected for citizenship. Great. We need more of that. We need more civic engagement opportunities for pupils to learn more about that. So I think what we need is a curriculum that brings in a bit more of the balance, like where we talk about breadth and depth. We need a bit more of that breadth brought back in. And I think that's what we are hopefully going to get with, if things go right with the curriculum review, although I think there's some still problems with that. So that there's that sense of like, what's on offer for children in school? Like, is it worth getting out of bed for? Because what we're seeing is like a lot of kids are not getting out of bed for school. We're seeing an increase of persistent absenteeism. And sometimes you think, well, come on, get to school. And then sometimes you think, to be honest, I can kind of see why you might not want to come in. Like, what are you getting out of bed for here? Now, I don't want to go back to that point of like, what are you doing for me? What am I getting out of this? Like, it's about the collective. But there's that balance there that I think we need to get right with this. So there's the assessment, there's the academic, and then enrichment and personal development. I'm really kind of keen on this. I think we overlook a lot of barriers that stop a lot of children from being able to engage with enrichment in and around schools. But it's such a missed opportunity, like all of the different cultural trips and visits and opportunities we can put on in place for children. But often the children who can't access those opportunities are those that maybe have additional needs and probably are also having that co-occurring barrier of being disadvantaged, because the two often overlap significantly. And if you're disadvantaged, what does that mean? It probably means you don't have much money to be able to afford a lot of the hidden costs that get in the way of things like enrichment opportunities. So like if you're saying to a child, come on this residential for 2 days, we're going to pay for your trip. You think, great, but there's hidden barriers there. Like, well, they're thinking, what am I going to wear? Because I've only really got one outfit that I like wearing when I'm around my mates. So I'm a bit kind of nervous around what I'm going to do in terms of clothes. What am I doing for food? How am I getting there and the transport? Like all of those kind of things that often we don't think about. So there's a lot of barriers that exist around enrichment, but enrichment should be a really good opportunity to like provide that extra enhanced fun stuff for kids to be able to engage with the collective good and what schools can offer. So like assessment, academic curriculum, enrichment, if we get that stuff right, we won't be asking too many veggies to dine in steakhouses. We'll be creating like a buffet of multiple forms of food and diets for everybody to be able to, get fed.
I think so. And I think it's making sure that the diet is a healthy, balanced one. But ultimately, what makes up a healthy of macros and micros is a really interesting thing. Of ultimately, I kind of see it as like I don't know why I always have this in my head of like a Tetris board. So when you come in, your line is this. You want to this is your kind of guardrail. We always talk about agency with guardrails, but actually, how you turn the shapes and the shapes that you pick, and you could say, I don't want that one, drop that one out and put this one in. How you make up your learning is really interesting. And I don't want to be like, oh, look what's happened and this is a knock-on effect, because we want to look about what the potential positive impact. But if I remember, just trying to think what year it was, but I used to lead in FE, the residential. Spot public services, 100 learners from really varied economic, social backgrounds. Some would have been able to afford it 5 times over, and some wouldn't be able to afford it at all. And I think it's always ensuring that ultimately the collective benefits, and how can we make sure that every learner that wants to be on those programs. The challenge is we used to go to a wonderful place, if you know the Lake District, right next to Derwentwater, and Cat Bells is right behind it and all those kind of things. What happened was that was affordable, and we made it affordable by some of the opportunities it was funded in terms of from government, but also some of those centres made it cost effective to go there because of some of the so like you take away all the other stuff and the wraparound thing in the communities, and actually it has a knock-on effect of education, because it might be 300, 400 quid to go for a 2-night stay now anywhere in Yorkshire on a residential for kids, when actually it used to be 100 quid, because there was more investment collectively in everything that benefited learning as a child. And I think we have to get back to that, don't we? That ultimately, learners aren't going to remember a maths class on a Friday afternoon. Even the brightest the people who love maths, and there are plenty of them out there, they're not going to remember the lessons. What they're going to remember is all of the situation, circumstance, that social bit, and all of the different things that make up learning and experience of learning, rather than just the taught curriculum. And also seeing, I remember when I was long time ago in education, and even going through the education system, those kids that you can't do GCSE, you go do an ASDAN. You can't do this, you go do this as as a negative connotation alternative. How do we shift that? So ultimately, we support those learners to make progress in their journey right now, because I've got friends that were on those pathways, and I've got friends who got A's, because it was still A's then, in every single GCSE, but actually their journey to be wonderful human beings now and successful in life actually isn't attached to those qualifications whatsoever. I was speaking to my cousin. He's a really successful, he owns a plumbing business, and he's got people working from everything else. He left with a PE qualification, and school just didn't fit. And actually, it's all of those different mechanisms and making sure that we support the jigsaw piece of learning, and actually making sure we support all learning experiences, not just what's in the classroom. We can't even afford pencils and bits of paper. Teachers are investing in their own resources. And now the PE investment is being removed in primary and secondary. And actually, how do we add back? And I think there has to be a synergy now where funding still has to happen. And how do we work between corporate and those people who want those people in future and in education? And if that's what we have to do, then I think that's what we're going to have to do to fund a real wonderful learning experience. But we just have to shift society's view of what a positive outcome is. And I think we change that by, and I think colleges are trying to do this, but this whole thing of let's show the wonderful work that you've done to see how many A's you've got, and look at open your certificates on GCSE day and A-level day. Absolutely fantastic for those young people. But let's celebrate progress rather than just a passing of a grade. I waffled a lot there, but I think it's a societal sort of thing of how do we change that and the view of what education and learning is, rather than just that passing of grade, which has been such a focus for such a long period of time, and actually celebrate everybody that's developing, not just GCSE or an A-level. I think we have to do that.
I think this is where milestones are important, where schools can really, in concrete terms, say, like from a personal development point of view, like schools are really good, aren't they, with assessment by saying, you're on this flight path to getting a grade 8 GCSE or whatever. We need to be more intentional around personal development and character and culture as well. So like an example in the school where I'm based, Archbishop Holgate's in York, we have this journey, it's called, and the journey spells out, each kind of letter spells out the focus for each year group. So for each year group, there's a kind of intentional focus of what we want the students to be focusing on in themselves and with each other. And so we put different activities in place, like a lot of schools will do this as well. But what we're able to do with this is intentionally say, in this year, what we're focusing on is opportunities. We want you to really get connected into the opportunities around you. In this year, we want you to focus on the sense of yourself and your character and your identity and some of that introspective stuff. Year 9 is the year that we would do a lot of that. And so we're able to sort of think about, like, where is that child in that trajectory, and how can we be supporting that child in terms of that development of themselves? But that, I don't know if that's the kind of thing that you're thinking about, but in my mind, that's where milestones and having concrete goals to aim towards can be quite useful when it comes to that kind of stuff. Because I agree, like, progress shouldn't just be the academic stuff. It should be around how are you progressing towards being happier and more fulfilled in life. I think that's important too.
I think so, because we're saying about these kids that are disengaged, and also then the 1 million people that are NEET. Not all of those people are people who are disengaged from education. Let's just call out as well.
Yeah,
NEETs,
exactly.
whatever you see on the news, these NEETs are not naughty boys and girls that didn't engage and didn't get GCSEs. Actually, a lot of those NEETs are people who were successful and got good qualifications. They just can't find the potential work that's right for them. But I think it's that thing of, we tell learners that aren't going to achieve a certain grade at GCSE through what's different language, that they potentially are going to be a failure, but then tell them they still have to attend and still go through the same path as everything else. And it's like, well, if you knew that the outcome of a benchmark that somebody had set for you wasn't achievable based on what somebody's telling you, why would you continue? we haven't really lit a fire there, have we, in terms of that continuation of learning, because we've said the end result is really the important bit. But carry on. And I know that we're telling you need a 4 or a 5. And I know you're going to get a 2, but crack on and make sure you attend every single day and give your best effort every single time. And I'm like, well, as adults, would we put up with that? But we expect these children who struggle with distraction and everything else more to carry on and crack on. And I think that's really, really key. But maybe in terms of because there's practical lessons from the book and there's examples within there, is there anything that stands out, maybe a couple where you think, you know what, there's some great examples that link to anything in regards to SEND or learning or adaptive elements that you think would apply for the wider audience? We don't want to give too much away. We want people to go and buy the book, of course, Andrew. But also, is there any little bit teasers in terms of those practical lessons?
I think one of the things that I talk about in the book is the 4 ingredients in the book. I mean, this is kind of like why I wrote it, I guess, because I think there's a lot of chat about adaptive teaching and what it is and what it isn't. And like, you know, is it the most useful term? Like, what's it got to do with differentiation? So I kind of get into that and like the nuances between those concepts. The way I've focused on adaptive teaching is the way I've designed and delivered a program, a CPD program, which has covered hundreds of schools, thousands of staff since the last 5 years that it's been running. And that program, it was basically what was then written into the book. And it covers the 4 areas of adaptive teaching that I think are like really good leadership lessons. They're really good for teachers to understand, for TAs to get behind, for families, for SENCOs to consider. And essentially, like adaptive teaching, I've presented it in a narrative of like, let's focus on the culture and the conditions of our environment. Let's look at the different models of health and SENS that we can consider in terms of social models versus medical models of healthcare. Challenging deficit language, like Steve, you just use that term NEAT. Well, I really like the term of looking for education, employment and training, like LEAT. It's a different one. So part of the culture of your organization is around putting the foundations in place so that people are thought of as assets and not kind of problems. And a lot of the time in SEND, I think a lot of the time the label and the way children are thought about with SEND is purely from a pathologized point of like, where's the problem? And that can often just result in fixed like problems, things not getting better. So culture is important and getting that right. Then we think about brains. That's the second ingredient. And that's really looking at, and in the book, what I cover are the 4 most common conditions that you find in a mainstream classroom environment. Workplaces will find them through the roof, I'm sure, as well, over the last few years. And that's autism, dyslexia, speech and language needs, and ADHD, those 4 common conditions. So we focus on that. We learn a little bit about those conditions, but you know, sometimes it can be a bit like a terrible joke. Like, what do you get in a classroom or a workplace if you've got somebody who's autistic with hypersensitivity, and they're sat next to somebody who's got ADHD and they're hyper alert and hyperactive, and they're sat next to a child who can read words but can't understand words, and they're sat next to a child who can't read words but might be able to understand them or make sense of them. And this is like the reality of a lot of classrooms with those conditions in mind. But what the book tries to present is that, like, let's not get bogged down on the diversity of those conditions. Although they are important, labels are necessary, but they are not sufficient. So when we look beneath the surface of those labels and those seemingly very different conditions, what we find is a lot of unity and a lot of commonality. And that commonality can typically be seen from a learning point of view as stemming from working memory, executive function, and cognitive load. And so when great teachers think hard about those big 3 factors, they're probably going to put some really good conditions in place to meet the needs of the diversity of those conditions. So culture, brains, and once we get that right and people understand that, then it makes more sense to then bring in the strategies. And in the book, I cover a lot of teaching strategies which are applicable to all walks of life. And the strategies are thought about in terms of both proactive and reactive. So not just things that you do like off on the cuff in a lesson, but things that you can actually plan into your lesson planning from design and your curriculum from design. So things like just really good high quality teacher talk, using beat gestures when you're talking, making it clear that if you're about to say something to the class, do they know why? Do they know what it's for? So like foreshadowing your teacher talk, saying to the kids, right, pay attention because I'm going to talk for 2 minutes. And after I've been talking for 2 minutes, you're going to have a task where you're going to be reaching for your mini whiteboard. Like if I saw that in every classroom, it'd be amazing. I very seldom see that. And so what I see a lot of the time is passivity. And the children are like, what are you talking for? What's this about? And then when it gets them doing the task, like Kel Surprise, like, right, reach for your mini whiteboards, like the hands are going up. Well, what are we doing again? Just little things like that we cover in the book. Things to do with like homework and how to set effective and inclusive homework so that the conditions are ripe, so that when kids are working on their own, they know how to work, but so do their parents, because that's another barrier that we need to consider. So, things like homework, things like modeling in the classroom and how to model effectively, using routines like I do, we do, and you do. So we cover a lot of strategies, and then it finishes with the fourth ingredient. So we've got culture, we've got brains, we've got teaching, and the fourth ingredient is all about curriculum. And that goes back to where we started our conversation around making sure the environment and the offer and the diet is as nutritious as possible for our pupils. So taking all the hallmarks of good, effective, adaptive teaching and not just working reactively, but proactively anticipating that we are going to have children. Like if you want to think about it like this, our bottom 25% of kids who struggle the most, let's design a curriculum that has them in mind. So let's design a curriculum that is extremely ambitious, but is designed in a way that understands that children need support with their executive function, with their cognitive load being optimized, and with their working memory being thought about as well. So there's a few kind of areas in there around that. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of things for the book without going into too much detail.
Yeah, it does, and I think you've picked up on something else that really resonated for us around that deficit language and about designing. And there was an old Christian Aid slogan for a while: "Labels are for jars, not for people." But I love what you've said there, that it's important to name things, but that not just to be a barrier or a ceiling on them. And obviously then thinking about that, and we could go into lots of conversations here, and I think there's possibly a second podcast to come out on this, because some of the things that we haven't even touched that we wanted to around cognitive load and how we can reduce that. And I wanted to make comment about that wonderful young person who interviewed Bridget Phillipson about reducing the amount of assessments recently, and 10% means that she would have done 2 exams fewer, so she'd have still done 18 or 19 exams when she was doing 20 or 21. Like, it's just, come on, like, it's rearranging the deck chairs. So we can definitely arrange to do another one of them. We always finish our podcast with 3 quickfire questions. They haven't changed for a little while. They may well be changing in the new season, but I'll do one, Steve will do one, and then I'll do another. The intention is quickfire. Some people get it, some people don't, but let's see. So the first question is, if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoy the experience, what would change overnight?
Well, we go back to single graded judgments, wouldn't we? Because if you're either 1-star Michelin, 2-star Michelin, 3-star Michelin, so we might go back to single graded judgments, which I wouldn't be in favour of.
Absolutely. Maybe the underpinning bit of what makes those stars is the interesting bit, but yeah, no, great one. Okay. What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
That will never work here. I think that's often used a lot. That will never work here. Our kids won't be able to do that. Our staff won't be able to do that. And it's just a bit of a get out clause, I think, sometimes. There might be some truth in it, but often it's too easy just to say that and then not try.
Yeah, love it. And finally, if a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
Well, my 6-year-old daughter was saying on Monday morning, I don't want to go to school. Why do I have to go to school? So this one feels very pertinent. What do you say? I said to her, but you want to see your friends. You want to spend time with your friends. You want to have some playtime and spend time with your mates. You've not seen them over the weekend. Go and connect with them. And that seemed to do the trick. So yeah, I would say that.
Love it. It's been a great conversation, hasn't it? And it's amazing how many people answer that exact same way about friends. and how, I wonder if many ever were people from the Department for Education would say that it is about friends. That's a different
Well, I mean, I know we've run out of time on this, but just to say quickly, I did some work with the engagement platform a couple of years ago, acting as a commissioner to support the outreach of that work. And when they've now surveyed over 300,000 pupils, and in the first census window of 80,000 pupils, what they saw was that where peer engagement or peer relationships dropped, then overall engagement with schools dropped. So peer relationships are a really important factor to bring up engagement in schools.
Wow. Yeah, and no doubt. I know that when my kids are happy at school and they've got their mates happy, then things they're more likely to want to go, aren't they? So if you haven't yet got a copy of Adaptive Teaching Cultures Classroom, please do grab your copy. The link is in the show notes. Connect in with Andrew and find out a little bit more about what he's doing around the CPD that they're working on as well. But we've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast, and
thank you very much.
We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Shaping the next generation. Dancing to the rhythm.